Porsche arrived on a flatbed on a Wednesday morning, and the woman who stepped out of the black SUV behind it looked like she had never once in her life been told no. Her name was Harlow Vance. She was maybe 42, 43. Sharp jawline, tailored coat, the kind of posture that comes not from confidence but from years of being watched. She owned Vance Capital, 3 offices, 12 portfolio companies, a name that appeared regularly in the financial press alongside words like visionary and ruthless, depending on who was doing the writing. The Porsche 911 GT3 RS on the flatbed was hers, ceramic white, custom interior, $240,000 worth of machine that, as of 4 days ago, would not start. Marcus Webb didn't look up right away. He was under the lift with a 009 F-150, replacing a corroded brake line, and he'd heard the flatbed pull in the same way he heard everything. Registered it, filed it, kept working. He had a rule about finishing what he started. His daughter Lily had told him once that it was one of his most annoying qualities. She'd said it with a smile, though. She'd been 8. That was 3 years ago, and she'd gotten better at hiding the smile since. He slid out from under the truck and stood. The woman was already looking at him with the expression of someone who has arrived at the wrong place, but refuses to admit it. "Mr. Webb?" she said. "Not a question exactly. More like a test. That's me." He wiped his hands on a shop rag and walked toward the flatbed. The Porsche was beautiful, even in distress. He let himself look at it for a moment before looking at her. "What happened?" "That," she said, "is what I've been paying people to figure out for 4 days." He nodded slowly. "And what have they told you?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Actual paper, printed and tabbed. He took it from her and opened it. 3 pages from a Porsche dealership in Charlotte, 2 from a performance shop in Raleigh, 1 from an independent diagnostics firm that charged $700 an hour and had concluded, in language designed to sound definitive, that the issue was likely related to a software fault in the DME module and recommended a full replacement at a cost of $14,000. Marcus closed the folder. "Did they replace it?" he asked. "They did," she said. 2 days ago. Car still won't start." He looked at the Porsche again, then back at her. "You want me to look at it?" "I want you to fix it," she said. "That's different." He almost smiled. Almost. Fair enough. What Harlow Vance had not expected, when she pulled up the address her assistant had found through some combination of desperation and internet searching, was a single-bay garage in a town of 4,000 people with a hand-painted sign above the door that read WBB Automotive and a parking lot with 2 trucks and a rusted Jeep Cherokee sitting on jack stands. She had expected someone larger, somehow, or at least someone with a staff. Marcus Webb was not large. He was lean in the way that physical work makes people lean, with hands that had been washed many times but never quite fully cleaned, the kind of hands that carry history in the creases. He was somewhere in his late 30s, maybe just past 40. He wore a gray t-shirt and work boots, and he had not shaved in a few days, and he looked at the Porsche the way she'd seen surgeons look at imaging scans. Not with excitement, but with a kind of quiet attention that she recognized despite herself as competence. She had driven past 3 exits before turning around and taking this one. She had told herself it was because she was out of options. That was true. What she didn't tell herself was that the voice on the phone the night before, when she'd called the number her assistant had found, expecting voicemail, getting Marcus instead, had sounded like someone who knew exactly what he was doing and had no particular need to prove it. "Who gave you this number?" he'd asked. "Does it matter?" A pause. "Guess not. What year is the car?" That had been the whole conversation, basically. He'd asked 4 questions. She'd answered them. He'd said, "Bring it in Wednesday morning," and hung up. She hadn't been hung up on in 11 years. The first hour, Marcus didn't touch the car. He walked around it twice. He looked at the flatbed driver's paperwork. He asked Harlow 3 questions. When it last ran correctly, whether it had been on track recently, what the weather was like the day it stopped. She answered the first 2 quickly and had to think about the third. "Cold," she said. "It dropped overnight, 20s. I had it in the garage, but the garage isn't heated." He nodded like she'd said something important. Then he went inside and came back with a handheld device she didn't recognize. Not the standard OBD scanner the dealership had used, not the Porsche PIWIS system the performance shop had brought in. Something older, almost. Or at least different. "What is that?" she asked. "Something I built," he said. He wasn't boasting. He was just answering. She stood back and watched him work. He didn't narrate. He didn't explain. He moved around the car with a kind of practiced efficiency that she associated with people who were very good at one specific thing and had spent a long time getting there. Her CFO moved the same way through a spreadsheet. Her head of legal moved that way through a contract. She'd always found it more reassuring than any amount of talking. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it, ignored it, looked back at Marcus. He was lying on a creeper now, not under the car exactly, but alongside it, running his hand along the underside of the engine bay. Feeling for something. She didn't know what. "Can I ask?" she said. "What you're looking for?" He didn't stop moving. "A feeling," he said. "Mostly. That's not especially reassuring." "No," he agreed. "It's not." Harlow Vance had built her first company at 26, sold it at 29, and had spent the 13 years since building and breaking and rebuilding other people's companies into something more valuable than they'd been before. She was good at reading rooms. She was good at reading people. She was, by most accounts, very good at being patient when patience served her interests, and very bad at pretending to be patient when it didn't. She lasted 40 minutes before she said, "The dealership had it for 2 full days." Marcus didn't look up. "Uh-huh. And the independent firm?" "$700 an hour," he said. "I saw the report. They ran full diagnostics, the PWIS system. Everything." "Yep." She waited. "And?" He finally looked up. Not at her, exactly. Past her, the way people look when they're thinking, and the visual field has become irrelevant. "The DME module was fine," he said. "Original problem was never in the module. But they replaced it anyway, which means now I've got a brand new module talking to a sensor array that's been recalibrated twice and a wiring harness that nobody's actually looked at." She was quiet for a moment. "Nobody looked at the wiring harness?" "Nobody hand-checked it," he said. "They ran it through the system. System said it was within spec. But within spec is a range, not a guarantee." He pushed himself back up to standing. "Your car sat in an unheated garage in 20-degree weather. Metal contracts. Tolerances close. Something that was technically within spec in a warm shop stops being within spec at the wrong temperature." He looked at the car. "It's a small fault. Nobody thought to look for it because the computer didn't flag it as a fault." Harlow felt something shift in her, quiet and involuntary. She'd sat in rooms with some of the most expensive consultants in the country and listened to them dress up uncertainty in the language of confidence. This man had just told her exactly what was wrong in plain English, and she had the distinct and unsettling sensation that he was correct. "How long?" she asked. "Give me an hour," he said. She walked down the road and found a diner and sat at the counter and ordered coffee she didn't need and thought about the 4 days she'd just spent. The dealership had kept the car for 48 hours and handed it back with a new module and a bill for $9,000, and an expression of absolute certainty that the problem was resolved. The performance shop had charged $4,000 for diagnostic time and concluded that the module replacement had been correct. The independent firm had charged $3,000 to confirm that and recommend a different module. $16,000. 4 days, 3 teams of experts. And a man in a single-bay garage in a town she'd never heard of was going to tell her in an hour. She thought about why that was. She turned it over the way she turned over every problem, looking for the structural reason, not just the surface failure. The dealerships had pious systems and factory training and every resource a Porsche technician could want. They also had flat rates and appointment windows and an institutional incentive to find a billable problem rather than the actual problem. The expensive consultants had billed by the hour, which meant more hours was more revenue, which meant depth of analysis was not necessarily in their interest. Marcus Webb billed by the job. He'd quoted her a flat rate over the phone before he'd even seen the car. She'd been so startled she hadn't even pushed back on the number. She thought about that for a while. About systems that reward the appearance of expertise rather than the exercise of it. About how much of her own industry, capital, investment, the buying and selling of companies, operated on exactly the same principle. Her phone buzzed again. This time she picked it up. When she walked back into the garage, the Porsche was idling. The sound it made was low and even and deeply, almost obscenely correct. The sound of an engine running the way it was engineered to run, with no hesitation, no stumble, no protest. She stopped in the doorway. Behind her, through the glass of the front office, she could see the back of a small head at a table. A child, maybe 10 or 11. doing something that looked like homework, headphones on, completely absorbed. Marcus was wiping down his hands. He looked at her the same way he had when she'd first arrived, assessing, not unkind. Wiring harness, he said. Section near the firewall. 1/2 centimeter of separation on one connector. Wouldn't show up in a static test. Shows up when the metal's been cold and you ask the car to start. She looked at the running car and then back at him. You fixed that. Reseated the connector, cleaned the contacts, added a protective sleeve so it doesn't happen again. If the cold's a regular concern for the storage situation, you might consider a thermal wrap on that section of harness. She nodded. She was aware of something pressing against the back of her throat that she hadn't felt in a long time and couldn't immediately name. How much? She asked. He told her a number that was, by any reasonable measure, absurdly low given what everyone else had charged. She started. That's the rate I quoted, he said, on the phone. She looked at the child in the office. Is that your daughter? A pause. Not the kind that means someone is deciding whether to answer. The kind that means someone is deciding how. Lily, he said. She comes in on half days. How old? 11. She looked at the girl. She was writing something, and her tongue was slightly out the way children's tongues go out when they're concentrating, and she had her father's same particular stillness, the quality of someone completely present in one task. She has your focus, Harlow said. Marcus looked at his daughter for a moment, in a way that Harlow recognized only because she'd seen it in very few places. The board members who'd started companies with partners who'd died, the founders who'd built something and knew what it had actually cost. The look of someone carrying something and not minding the weight but not pretending it isn't there. She does, he said. She paid him in cash. She had a habit of carrying cash, an old instinct from early years when cash was all she had. He gave her a receipt written on a carbon copy form with a printer that looked older than the Porsche. She was almost to the door when she stopped. The people who looked at it before you, she said. The dealership, the shop, the diagnostics firm. What did they miss? He thought about it. They were looking for what the computer told them to look for, he said. The computer didn't have a fault code for a 0.5 millimeter connector gap at low temperature. So they didn't look for it. They looked for problems the system knew how to name. She stood there. Outside, the flatbed had already gone. She'd have to drive the Porsche back herself, 2.5 hours up the highway to Charlotte. What did you look for? She asked. He picked up a socket wrench and turned it in his hands once, a small automatic gesture, the way musicians adjust instruments when they're thinking. I looked for what was actually wrong, he said. She thought about that for a long moment. The fluorescent lights of the garage hummed faintly. Through the office window, Lily had put her pencil down and was stretching her arms over her head the way children do when they've been sitting too long. Then she picked it back up and went back to work. I'm going to tell people about you, Harlow said. I'd appreciate it if you didn't, he said. I've got all the work I can handle. She looked at him. He was completely serious. All right, she said, and she almost laughed. She couldn't remember the last time someone had turned down a referral from her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been somewhere that felt this steadily, unhurriedly itself. A garage in a small town, a man with grease under his fingernails, a girl doing homework on a Wednesday afternoon, the sound of an engine running exactly the way it should. She drove back to Charlotte with the windows down despite the cold, and she thought about systems that look for what they already know how to find. And she thought about what it costs when the answer doesn't fit in a box the computer recognizes. And she thought about a man who had looked at the actual problem instead of the reported one and found it in 45 minutes. And she didn't tell anyone about him because she understood, in the way she understood most things that mattered, that some things work precisely because they haven't been discovered yet. The next half day that Lily came to the garage, she found her father reorganizing the parts shelf. A project he started every few months and never quite finished. Someone called, she said, handing him the phone log he kept in a spiral notebook on the desk. A lady from Charlotte. Ask if you did house calls. Marcus looked at the entry, the name, the number. Then he set the notebook down. What did you tell her? I said I'd have you call back. Lily tilted her head. Should I have said something else? He thought about it. Outside, a truck was pulling in, regular customer, transmission job he'd been putting off for a week. The work was real and constant and his, and the town was small, and the sign above the door was hand-painted, and the garage smelled like oil and cold air, and whatever was left of a life he hadn't chosen but had built anyway, piece by piece, in the years since the morning he'd stood in a hospital hallway and understood that some problems don't have solutions, only reckonings. "No," he said. "You said exactly the right thing." He picked up the notebook and wrote a number beside the entry and went outside to see about the truck, and Lily watched him go. And then she put her headphones back on and opened her book, and the garage was quiet in the way that some places are quiet when nothing is wrong and everything is simply, ordinarily, enough.